But I think increasingly the goal is not to have a change program, but to build a change platform that allows people to come together and solve these problems collectively in ways that we simply can't do individually.
You're not opposed to the idea of the big corporation, but you think it needs to change. Again, can this be done? People cling to these institutions. We can't rule out human nature in saying I've got to hang on to what I've got.
No, I think it's one of the biggest challenges we face. I've been involved in organizational transformation initiatives for more than 30 years. I only have one lesson to share from all that experience. And that is, if you think organizational transformation is a rational process, you have lost. If you think that all you have to do is do all the analysis, get the data, put it on charts, share it with everybody, and mobilize everyone forward, you've lost. The one lesson I have is organizational transformation ultimately is a profoundly political process. The only thing that matters in organizational transformation is finding ways to identify and neutralize the enemies of change, and there are enemies of change, the ones who have power today, and to identify and strengthen the champions of change. If you have to engage in direct conflict with the enemy, direct battle with the enemy, you've lost the war.
So as an organization grows, bureaucratic drag grows even faster. That's an empirical fact. The ratio of managers to employees goes up, rules proliferate, decision cycles get longer, policies become more formalized, staff groups accumulate more power, and legal has to sign off on everything. And that's the dynamic that turns leaders into laggards. The fact is, most of us are prisoners of precedent. Why? Why are we still stuck?
I've been involved in large-scale organizational change efforts now for over 30 years. And over that time period, I've developed enormous respect for the immune system and the antibodies of every large institution. The antibodies within or institutions today are extremely powerful, and they will do everything possible to crush change.
So what is it going to take? Despite 20 or 30 years of rhetoric around innovation, there's not one company out of 100 that has yet made innovation intrinsic and instinctive. We are up against challenges that lie outside of the old management model. So if we're really going to solve this problem, my view is that we are going to have to kill bureaucracy. We're going to have to pull it up by its roots. Virtually every large-scale organization around the world is still run on the principles of bureaucracy. Power trickles down, strategy is set at the top, big leaders appoint little leaders, people compete for promotion, rules proliferate, tasks are assigned, managers ensure compliance. That's management 1.0. Without doubt, the most important invention of the last 150 years was the invention of management. The tools, the methods we use to mobilize and organize resources to productive ends. It is literally the technology of human accomplishment. And I'm arguing that today, that technology has to be reinvented, root and branch. It is a problem that I think is so urgent, so complex, and so eminently worthwhile that none of us who have a stake in the future of humanity should be sitting on the sidelines.
To me, it's a huge knowledge infrastructure problem. People use the knowledge infrastructure that's at their hands. Same with clays. You know, they will use the RONA calculations, the IRR calculations that they've been taught. And I just don't think there is yet a ubiquitous knowledge infrastructure for doing what Gary's talking about doing. And it's not being helped by, dare I say, the business school world. So the business school business, I don't think, is building very quickly the knowledge infrastructure that Gary's talking about, and so people will use the knowledge infrastructure for managing and for Clay's point, calculating that they've been taught and that is in wide use.
Now, what to do about it? So I've decided that academia has a crummy model for influencing thinking or action. And this is what So I write a book, and I think that I'm writing it for lots of people to read it. That's actually not true, because the idea is consumed individually. We always learn it individually. And even if it's a great idea, they consume it individually, they go to work on Monday, and they say, holy cow, I think I understand, what's going on, but because everybody else didn't consume the idea, it's very hard to get collective action, given that this is our distribution or channel to the market. And then you can think about our readers as resellers of the idea. And most of our resellers try to resell the idea before finishing the book. And what they sell is not what was written, right? And the system is just very hard in the way it's structured to make any change because of this, And what we have to do is we need to create a system, who knows how, a system where executives consume the idea together so that they can stand up with one voice and say, just like we had Martin Luther made 99 theses and stick it on the wall and say, ladies and gentlemen, they've gone off the rails. We're going to change it. We actually need to do that as managers. Individually, we can't do it. Business schools have the wrong model. But together, we take action together, or we really are in deep trouble.
If you think about the education system and ask the question, what proportion of the current education system writ large of time is spent on analyzing and understanding what is versus creating that which does not now exist? I would argue that writ large it's at least 98, maybe 99% the former. I think the nation or jurisdiction that makes innovation education a mandatory part of the education system will win in the 21st century.
What really has driven me a little bit crazy about the whole world of business schools over the last 20 years is almost nothing that gets written challenges the worldview. And at some point in any field of human endeavor, you get to the point where you cannot solve the new problems with the old principles. But there's almost nothing that is being written that challenges those fundamental premises. And then likewise, very little of what comes out of academic research in business schools actually is at the level of practice. There's very little traction you can get with this. It's just kind of an idea. So a lot of times academics complain to me, they say, Gary, why isn't anybody reading what we're writing? Why don't they take us seriously? I say, well, if what you're writing is neither profound nor practical, don't expect to have a big audience, right? If it doesn't change a worldview and you don't get any traction, not much is going to happen. And I think today, and I've been thinking a lot about this for CEOs, for those of us who try to influence the world of thinking, today I think the challenge is not to come up with the next idea, the challenge is not to write a book perhaps even, but the challenge is to build a platform where people can come together, where they can work together collectively to solve these problems.
Listening to the panels yesterday, a conversation that I had with somebody in New York who phoned me about 3 months ago, and he was the recruitment manager for a large international group. And he said, we have a problem, he said. We've been doing an autumn round of universities and business schools and so on. We've identified some very exciting people, he said. And as you know, we offer fantastic salaries and conditions. He said, problem? None of them seem to want to join us. What's going on? I said, well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? You've identified, likely stars, sexy people. But they're guerrilla fighters, and you're a regimented army. They don't want to join you. Why should they? You're boring.
A recent survey said that 66% of young people today want to join a startup after school. Entrepreneurship is now the #1 track for Wharton Business School students. 1/3 of all Stanford MBAs are in a startup within 3 years of graduation. And again, it's not hard to see why.
I think you need alignment between purpose in a large company and then giving people the space to live the purpose and explore new ideas. Because sometimes we have these corporate values and we we put up this purpose, and then the people who want to create something new, they don't have a space or a home in their company to actually explore new ideas that could help, make that purpose reality. I think big companies today, or established companies, are at risk of losing their best innovation talent to entrepreneurship. It's never been easier than before to become an entrepreneur at scale, anywhere in the world. I think it's possible, even if there's concentration in Silicon Valley, etc. But the best innovation talent today is leaving established corporations because it's suicide to pursue an innovation career today in many organizations, if I may generalize a little bit. So we need to align purpose and innovation spaces where you can actually pursue an innovation career and help the company become better at that purpose and not just rely on the past.
Would it help if companies would hire, if they could, more people who were trained as entrepreneurs and put somewhere in the company, if mostly a person who will get a degree for being trained as an entrepreneur doesn't want to go to a big company. But if the company lacks people who have entrepreneurial mindsets, so every company here should think, hey, give me the names of some people who look like original thinkers and entrepreneurs. I want to hire them. It's going to be an antidote to decaying.
For that to succeed, you'd actually have to have a system for training entrepreneurs.
Yes.
And that is completely lacking. The business educational infrastructure doesn't do that. So the training for entrepreneurship, the dominant training for entrepreneurship is on the job, i.e. entrepreneurs being entrepreneurs. And I don't think many of them, after being an entrepreneur, they're either going to be completely failed, in which case you don't want them in the corporation, or they're going to be successful, in which case they're going to say, why on earth would I go to work for a corporation when I can make more money being an entrepreneur? So I think it would take a sea change, a complete sea change in business education to actually do something on training entrepreneurs.
John, you made in a blog post before the conference that everyone needs to be an entrepreneur. I mean, that's obviously what you believe, but is there not a role for people who are saying, I'm just going to mine more out of the incremental improvements that I can bring through at the company where I'm working?
Based on the work we've done, which is looking at the long-term forces reshaping the global business landscape, our belief is we are in the early stages of a big shift that has many different dimensions to it, but a key dimension is accelerating pace of change and increasing uncertainty. And in that kind of environment, I would challenge anyone to say there is an activity that should continue to be done the way it's been done, exploiting.
Right.
I believe every activity in every institution, and by the way, not just companies, governments, schools, NGOs, every activity needs to become an exploration activity done by entrepreneurs, done by people who are creatively motivated, have the imagination and curiosity to explore new ways of doing things so they can add more value, and the commitment to actually move from the idea to action and willingness to take risk in order to do that.
Do good people come up to you and say thank you for doing what you're doing?
Absolutely. There are people in the State Department that will stop you, or all of the agencies that we've been to, that'll stop you in the hallways or write emails and say, I was scared to write this, or I don't know if you're interested in this. But they usually have great ideas. And if they often have the best ideas because they've worked in the places and they've been stifled by the bureaucracy for so many years. So one of the great things that, at least in my experience, and we listen to them and empower them. So
yes, in fact, I'd like to emphasize that because we'd like to just give a big thank you to all the government employees who are helping reduce the waste and fraud, because this is, we really couldn't do it without you. So
it's a group effort.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not trying to sort of say all government employees are bad. That's absolutely not the case. It's just that, there actually just does need to be a serious effort to reduce the waste and fraud. And we're just making that happen. And a lot of people in the government are very glad to see it happen.
I think it's really important to recognize every single person around this table that's embedded within an agency is supporting that agency, whether they're working on systems or working through people. We are encountering droves of government employees who are missionaries, not mercenaries, who are actually here serving because they believe in what they're doing and they want to do things well. We are trying to empower them, and they feel empowered now to ask the question of why? Why aren't we doing this? What else can we be doing? How can we fix this? And I think agency by agency, it is filled with exceptional government employees, right? And when we give them the tools, when we give them the systems, and we leave behind systems to help them do their jobs better, that's the permanent change, right? And they're embracing that, not because it's new to them, it's because it's something they've always wanted to do. But for the first time ever, we're giving them the tools and the collaboration to be able to do that.
It's a very important message. Yeah. That message needs to get out a lot more. I'm so glad you said that.
We have exceptional people at all of our agencies, exceptional. I mean, they do a thankless job and they work incredibly hard.
I love to hear how collaborative it is with these people in these agencies, and it's not all conflict. Sometimes in the media, you always hear about conflict, and you guys are considered these ruthless suits that come in and scare people, but it's...
Conflict is the exception. There is conflict, but that is the exception. That's actually true of history in general. People study the wars a lot, but actually most of the time there wasn't war.
It's just not as exciting.
It's just not as exciting.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, for the TV guys, we like conflict, but in this case, we love the collaboration. So thank you guys. Thanks for allowing me this access in here. You guys are just really, really bright, young, smart patriots. And you have a great team. And thank you, Elon, for everything you've done for the country. We really appreciate it. We're eternally grateful.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
How do we create an alternative to the centralized, top-heavy, tradition-encrusted management processes and models that for 150 years and more have been the scaffolding for large-scale human organization? What we can do as a species, the problems we can solve, the challenges we can overcome is really fundamentally limited by the tools and processes we have at our disposal. How do we bring people together in productive ways to accomplish amazing things? The challenge, I would argue, is that we are now held hostage by an old management model that is increasingly becoming out of date. It's left us with organizations that are too incremental in a world where creativity is the only insurance against irrelevance. And it's left us with organizations that are just simply uninspiring. At the same time that it's initiative and passion and imagination that drive performance, these are human capabilities that are gifts that people bring to work only when they are inspired. In the midst of all that turmoil and all that change, most large organizations have struggled to stay relevant. If you went around the world and you asked virtually any human being who works for an organization of any size, if you asked any of these people to draw a picture of their organization, they're going to draw something that looks like this. And in one form or another, this has been humanity's most durable social structure. I think the primary reason large organizations ultimately start to go sideways is in that traditional hierarchical model where we vest the authority for strategy and direction in a few people at the top. We essentially give that small group of people the capacity to hold the organization's capacity for change hostage to their own personal willingness to adapt and change. Or to put it more simply, organizations start to go sideways when the leadership team fails to write off its own depreciating intellectual capital. So this is going to have to change. You simply cannot build highly resilient organizations when the primary architecture behind those structurally and preemptively empowers the few and disempowers the many. By the time an issue becomes big enough to get the CEO's attention, to get through all the clutter on his or her desk, by definition, you are too late. Which is why virtually every large-scale change program is actually a catch-up program. But there's also an ideological challenge, because the ideology of management is kind of invisible to us, but it is there. It is exercising its power, its authority all the time. If you go to basically any thesaurus around the world, in any language, and you look up the phrase to manage, where manage is used as a verb, the #1 synonym around the world is to manage means to control. Right? As managers, we manufacture control. Employees manufacture products and services, but we are the enforcers, enforcing compliance and conformance to budgets, to work standards, to ethical guidelines. 100 years ago, Max Weber said this very simply. He said, bureaucracy is the most rational means of carrying out imperative control over human beings. Superior to anything else in precision, stability, discipline, reliability. Unfortunately, those are not now the organizational qualities that will get you ahead. Those are precision, stability. These are table stakes. There's almost no competitive advantage left in that outside of a few industries like healthcare and education, right? Most industries have already figured out how to do this. And yet control is at the core of our management philosophy. There was a recent survey, 300 large organizations around the world, and they were asking employees about their leaders, their managers. Only 21% of employees around the world said that my leader empowers me to make decisions. Only 21%. That's just like, despite the decades of talking about empowerment and engagement and job enrichment, that ideology is absolutely still in control. So what happens again and again as firms grow? Bureaucracy takes over. I was talking recently in one of the darlings of Silicon Valley, a company that's pioneered all kinds of new markets, software as a service. This company is, I don't know, $3 or $4 billion US in revenue. They have 600 vice presidents, for goodness sakes. So you can just watch this happen. The ratio of managers to frontline staff goes up because you have more and more managers managing other managers. Decision cycles get longer, policies get more formalized, staff groups, finance, HR accumulate more power, decisions get rolled out instead of getting rolled up, legal has to sign off on everything, and you can just see this wet cement slowly set. I think it'd be impossible to find any executive around the world who's a booster for bureaucracy. I've never met a leader who says, Gary, what we really need is more bureaucracy. And yet, I've met very few who can suggest an alternative. And so the truth is, as managers, we've been kind of fiddling at the margin. So we've denounced bureaucracy, but we certainly haven't dethroned it. Buried within the notion of change management are 4 self-limiting beliefs. Within change management, 4 self-limiting beliefs. The first belief is that there's an assumption that only a few people, a small number of people, have the right to initiate change, while most don't. But how is anything ever going to change if the people who are in charge of change are over-invested in the past, as they often are over-isolated from the future, as they often are? That's why most change programs are actually catch-up programs. Second self-limiting assumption is that change cascades downwards. This virtually assures that change will be resistant. When both the means and the ends of a change program are prescribed and sent down, you can bet that it's not going to be embraced. And then change leaders take comfort in the thought that people are against change. It's complete rubbish. People are not against change, they're against royal edicts. Third, there's a belief that change can be engineered, like a large-scale construction project or an IT overhaul. And finally, there's an assumption that change is episodic, that it exists, between long periods of stasis. But today, anything that's frozen for long becomes irrelevant. So I would argue we got to change the way we changed. What's needed is not a change program, but a change platform and something more like a giant hackathon. We've been opening up a conversation with tens of thousands of people simultaneously and asking them, what is it that stands in the way of you innovating? Is it access to resources? Is it time? Is it Slack? Is it good mentorship? Is it customer insights and so on? And I think a lot of times CEOs are fairly nervous when you say what we're going to do is we are going to involve the whole organization in retooling our processes so they're more innovation friendly. My experience has been when you ask people what stands in the way and then you ask them how do you fix that, they are very thoughtful about it. Most people love their organizations, they wanted to succeed. My experience is that when you give people responsibility and accountability for engineering the systems by which their lives at work are managed, and you tell them we have to be simultaneously good at operations and good at innovation and adaptable, they rise to the challenge and they'll surprise you. The problem with so many top-down change programs is the solution space is limited by what a few people at the top can imagine. Amazon has said, we want to be the world's biggest laboratory. We're simply going to try more things than anybody else, meaning product and business innovation. I think you have to take the same thing when you start to think about how do you retool your management model. It's a matter of saying, we're going to have to experiment. My experience is when you open that conversation up to people, when you make them smart about the underlying principles that we need to build into our DNA, and you ask them how, they will surprise you. And it's incredibly constructive, and there's very little negative energy that I've seen in that process.
What is the thing, this is a great Peter Drucker quote, what is the thing that you're going to change or that we should be changing on Monday morning when we get back from a weekend in Vienna? John.
I would just say that as we start to create a movement, I think we need to stay focused on a paradox. And to me, the key paradox is that a human element is actually the biggest obstacle to building more human institutions. And that human element is fear. The emotion of fear. I believe that is becoming more and more pervasive, and any movement that's going to achieve impact has to recognize and address that fear in order to have impact. I've studied movements for a long time. I've even participated in a few, and what I've discovered is that regardless of the location around the world, the time in history, every movement has had two elements. Every successful movement has had two elements. One element is an inspiring opportunity-based narrative that is a powerful call to action, that moves people to act. And I think that is counter to, I think, a tendency many of us have, which is to focus on the threat. What's going to happen to us if we don't move? No. What is the opportunity that if we all came together, that we could accomplish together? So powerful narrative, call to action, first element. Second element is a cellular structure. Every successful movement that I've studied and participated in has had a cellular structure where the basic unit of organization is 5 to 15 people that come together on a regular basis, build deep trust-based relationships with each other, and are not discussion groups, they're action groups. And they hold each other accountable for action and impact. And they also provide encouragement to each other when things don't go as well as they had expected. And I think that connecting those cells into a broader network ultimately allows a movement to scale. But the basic unit is that cellular structure. And so when you leave here, I guess my recommendation is don't go it alone as you leave here. Think about who are at least 2 or 3 people that you could connect with and start to form a cell. And focus on what kind of action or impact could you achieve in the short term so that you can get reinforcement and encouragement that there's something worth fighting for. And then over time, connect those cells into a broader network and reflect and learn as you go in terms of what kind of impact is really required. So I think the key for any movement, my recommendation, is to help more and more people move from fear to hope and excitement. That's the key. I think one of the key reasons that we're seeing a growing amount of fear, and it's actually the focus of my new book, is in our political environment, we have increasingly on all sides, I don't hold hate groups particularly guilty, I think it's all groups, are falling into threat-based narratives. It's all about the enemy is coming to get us. We're all going to die if we don't mobilize now and resist. And that feeds the fear. That plays to the fear. But it's the combination, in my mind, of an opportunity-based narrative that says, what could we accomplish if we came together, plus small moves smartly made that can set big things in motion. Because if you just articulate some grand view opportunity without showing impact quickly, you're not going to you're not going to overcome the fear and build the hope.
So when you look at some of the benchmarks, you see again and again that the returns on investing in people, on increasing their level of discretion, on helping them think more like true business people and business owners, that investment pays off again and again and again. But what it takes, and I think this is the very difficult thing, it takes a fundamental rethink about where power lies in an organization.
So as you said, it's asking the C-suite to do this is like asking turkeys to vote for Thanksgiving. So how do you do it? I mean, you know, the examples that you cited, and you didn't go into detail. Who is it? Is it a founder, CEO who has to lead change like this, or how does it?
So a couple of very, very quick thoughts. One is, I actually think it can start from anywhere, and I think you might be hearing some stories later in the Drucker Forum. But we have taught people in our organizations to be helpless. We've taught them that you cannot change the system unless you own the system. And I think that's just rubbish. You know, when a young person comes to me and says, Gary, you have the ear of the leaders, we think our HR system sucks, or something else we need to change, can you help make this point? I always say no. I say, well, what you have to say when you have an idea, the first impulse cannot be to go up. The first impulse is to go across. The first impulse is to build a coalition. Find people who share your passion. Get them to show up on a Saturday morning. Put a white paper together. Do a prototype. Because leaders have a very easy time saying no to one person, because one person's often wrong. But if your idea has survived the scrutiny of your peers and you've engaged them, which you can now easily do through social media, leaders have a very difficult time saying no to a large group of people. I will tell you, systemic problems usually don't get solved systemically. They get solved, if you look at change throughout the world, they happen when somebody is willing to stand up and make a start, wherever they are. And I've long been kind of surprised and disappointed that as many CEOs talk about change and the need for change, almost none of them talk about activism. And how do you train employees in your own organization? Not to be anarchists, not to be terrorists, to be activists. Activists are not content with mediocrity. They are not bound by their job description. They have a great sense of responsibility for making things better. They do not assume they're helpless. They do not start by asking permission. They are not stupid, right? They're not foolish, but they often are quite fearless. And I think that's where change starts. It changes with every individual going back and saying, what did I learn from this conference? What's an idea that I can use? How do I bring people around me? How do we make a difference? All out of proportion to where you sit in the world. And when you approach that task with courage, when you're willing to tackle problems that are way bigger than your pay grade, when you approach it with a contrarian spirit and you're willing to challenge conventional thinking, and when you come at it with true humility and compassion, when the people around you know you are in it for them and in it for making life better for the colleagues around you, I will tell you what, you can do amazing things that will shock and surprise you, and you will leave the world a better place. I think there are a lot of people in organizations today who think the idea of changing these big organizations, making them more flexible, more creative, and more inspiring places to work, that challenge seems to them like that should be somebody else's problem. There's an incredible amount of learned helplessness in organizations, and I see this in a lot of conferences I go to, not necessarily this one, but you'll see CEOs get up there and talk about some amazing thing they did in their organization. You go like, well, wow, that's interesting, you're the CEO. And then you have people, maybe like some of us out of academia or whatever, who will tell people how to be more effective in your role, how to be a better leader, how to be a better manager.
What you almost never hear is somebody telling you how to change the system when you don't own the system, right? How do you change HR, finance, IT, whatever, when that's controlled, by people, somewhere up in the corporate tower? But if you have that sense of helplessness, you will never change anything. It happens from activists. And so for me, you have to start thinking about yourself as an activist. Deep change never has started top down. It just doesn't happen that way.
Change only happens when you have a leader who wants to change, and then you start to mobilize ordinary individuals. And so one of the great tools that leaders have today, and this is what we've been using, is you can take these problems and you can start to outsource them to the whole organization. So I start to create a lot of pressure from the top. We know we need to change. This is no longer tenable. And a lot of pressure from the bottom. Let's make something different happen. And then you trap the folks who don't want to change kind of in the middle of that sandwich. Vineet Nair of HCL Technologies told the story last night in a dinner about going out and asking every single employee at HCL to give him a performance review. Well, he didn't start by saying, let's change the way we do leadership evaluation, let's get the HR people, because I can tell you his vice presidents would have had a huge amount of resistance. You do it. You mobilize the organization, then other people have pretty much no choice but to follow along. Mm-hmm. In many senses, the real battle lines today are not between companies or ecosystems. The real battle lines are between completely different value creation regimes, between the open market for ideas and talent and capital that characterizes Silicon Valley-style entrepreneurship on one hand, and between the painstaking disciplines of large-scale bureaucracy on the other hand. And in recent years, it's looked like entrepreneurship is winning. Since 1983 in the US, the size of the bureaucratic class has doubled in terms of share of employment. The US is not so much a gig economy, a sharing economy, an entrepreneurial economy. It is a citadel of bureaucracy. Now, there's some who would argue that large companies are incapable of entrepreneurship, that the best you can do is create little entrepreneurial enclaves, incubators off on the side, that are disconnected from the core business, that can neither leverage their resources nor transform the core business. I think that's entirely defeatist. Entrepreneurship at scale is possible. I've seen it, it's happening. But only, I would argue, only if we excise bureaucracy, and that's not going to be easy. Bureaucracy is familiar, it's well entrenched, and it's well defended. I'd like to ask a quick question. What do you think has been the most important movement in management thus far? And the hint is it was led by people like Mary Parker Follett, Elton Mayo, Douglas McGregor, Edwards Deming, and of course it was the human relations movement who asked, how do we build organizations where people can flourish? And the leaders in that knew that to humanize organizations, they needed laboratories. They needed the equivalent of Thomas Edison's workshop. And they found willing companies at the time in the 50s and 60s, Volvo and AT&T and so on. And many of those experiments produced extraordinary results, 50 or 100% gains in productivity and so on. And yet here we are today having kind of a very similar conversation. I wonder if they came back, us in the shadow of those giants, if they came back, how would they assess our progress? Would they go like, wow, agile teams, we would have never thought of that? Or would they say, like, we were doing that in the 1960s in a dog food plant, like, come on, let's move the ball forward. So I do think you have to ask why we're stuck, and I think a few quick things and then a quick kind of idea on how to go forward. I think we're stuck, still because of orthodoxy, still because of a lot of us are trapped in an old paradigm like car makers trying to wring the last few dollars out of the combustion engine. I think we're trapped because of timidity. I think a lot of leaders I meet, a lot of academics, we suffer from ADD, ambition deficit disorder. And when somebody challenges us to do something that's radical and new, our first question is like, who else has done it? Fragmentation, a lot of academics, researchers, we work in our silos. I think there's very little collaboration across businesses in management experimentation. And then irrelevance. I have to say, I read very little management research that is both bold and practical. Very little that would deserve to have any company want to sponsor it. Here's a little data point. Last year in the United States, companies spent $2.6 billion on university-based life science research.
The total amount they spent on research in business schools was 51 million, just like this tiny fraction. And so I think we need a new human movement. And I think the missing thing, in a way, the thing that's been lacking is something that allows us to multiply our efforts to build something that is a community of communities that overcomes the gravitational pull of the status quo.
Is the idea that you have in your own network, in your own capacity, people and ways of working that can start to change the way in which the world operates, the way in which management and leadership are conceived of. It's not something that needs to be done in a great top-down way.
A lot of change hasn't worked because companies haven't responded in time, and most of that accountability today is at the top. You know, the reality is almost every change program in a large organization is a catch-up program, because management is often the last to know. And so I think our leaders have let us down. I think they haven't, as Tammy said, they haven't mobilized the intelligence that's there in the organizations. They haven't built those new strategic options. They haven't given people the opportunity to start experimenting where they are. And so you see the world changing around you. You know that your organization is not changing as fast as that, and that induces fear, and then that induces a kind of pushback. So I think for whatever structures we have today, but from the top down, we have to live in an attitude of hope. We have to know that the world is filled with opportunities, that as human beings, you know, we've created, we can continue to create. The tools of creativity are now more widely distributed than ever before in human society, that every day you see new social entrepreneurs, new companies. And so all of us, it's our responsibility to see that hope, to remind people of what we're capable of, to get the obstacles out of their way. And that's a personal responsibility on every one of us to cultivate that sense of hope in everyone around us. Any strategy for defeating bureaucracy, any strategy for unleashing entrepreneurial energy, which is everywhere, it is everywhere, that isn't animated by a certain level of moral indignation is going to fail. We'll end up settling for half measures. We will fail to persevere because this is a hard task. The fact that only 13% of employees globally are fully engaged in their work is unconscionable. And all the data says the problem is not the work. The problem is the way bureaucracy infantilizes employees. The problem is a caste system which draws an artificial distinction between thinkers and doers. In one study, barely a fifth of the employees polled said their managers were willing to share power. History suggests that it takes a heightened moral consciousness to change deeply embedded social structures. Thomas Paine, writing 200 and some years ago, said a long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gives it a superficial appearance of being right. So when it comes to animating social change, no argument in history has been more irresistible than the one that asserts that every human being has a right to exercise and profit from their natural gifts, and that any human-crafted impediments to that pursuit are unjust. And in the case of bureaucracy, this means finally admitting that its waste of human capacity is indefensible. So unleashing the entrepreneurial talents that reside in our organizations and your organization isn't then primarily an economic imperative. It is primarily a moral imperative, and I would argue one that deserves the energy and the passion of everyone in this room. Thank you. Team members know what is impeding their capacity to innovate, what's getting in the way of their ability to generate ideas, to get funding, whatever it may be. And if we've learned anything from design thinking, it should be this, that everything starts with the users. Organizational transformation starts with the users as well. It's hard to change deep realities top down. There are too many around you who can slow walk your reforms. They will feign agreement with your aims, but then passively resist real change. In relative terms, the CEO has a lot of power, but in the context of an organization of tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of individuals, not so much. So that's why you have to crowdsource organizational transformation. You have to ask a broad cross-section of team members what gets in your way to innovate, to adapt, to move faster. Because when 50 or 100 individuals say this rule is stupid, or why is it so hard to get experimental capital, then no small cadre of executives can hit the mute button. So we need to abandon once and for all the idea that change is something that cascades. Change needs to roll up, not roll out.
I would say that the tendency, first of all, is to go top-down, big bang approach to change, which in my experience actually amplifies the immune system, and at least the academic studies that have been done show that anywhere from 70 to 80% of those efforts have failed to achieve any of their objectives. And I think that the need, in part, is the other tendency is to focus on threat. You know, if we don't do this, we're going to die. We need to do this. My belief is the successful change efforts focus on the opportunity and try to inspire for each individual what's in it for them, why is this such an important opportunity for them, and then start with small steps that will actually demonstrate impact quickly so that you get a reinforcing cycle that this is doable and it actually does produce a much better outcome in terms of each of us as individuals. An entrepreneurial society is one that's going to allow every one of us to achieve much more of our potential than if we continue to just follow the tasks that have been defined for us.
The fact that only 13% of employees globally are fully engaged in their work is unconscionable. This is a hard task. Any strategy for unleashing entrepreneurial energy, which is everywhere, it is everywhere, that isn't animated by a certain level of moral indignation is going to fail.